Anyway, this is Rosa Eberly, I'm Doug Hesse, and this is Richard Colby. And what I thought would be fun is for 45 minutes, very informally, to get you talking about stuff. And so we don't have great method or plan here. But one of the things I'm interested, we were talking on the way over of your growing up near the Mason-Dixon line, just on the right side of it, or the wrong side, depending on your perspective.
The north side of it.
Yeah. So how did you come to Penn State, and then how did you eventually find yourself in this position?
Found myself.
Or made yourself?
Found myself. I'm a first generation college student, and I was allowed to apply to one school, and that school was Penn State. And I was okay with that because my big sister had gone there.
Uh-huh.
And my goal was pretty much to get away from my parents, God love them. And I came from rural York County, Pennsylvania, Dutch girl, raised Methodist. Thank you, Mr. Reverend Evans.
Yeah.
And if not for my teachers in middle school, well, elementary, middle school, and high school, I was not a very motivated student, but did okay thanks to the attentions of my teachers. But went to Penn State and fell in love. I had written a whole lot before that, but I fell in love with reporting and editing and journalism. The Daily Collegian is one of the best student newspapers in the country. So while I had been a debater and a speaker and sometimes a lay preacher when I was in high school.
Really?
Yeah.
We want to hear about that.
It's the rhetorical Holy Spirit. We'll get to that. I don't do the God thing anymore, but the rhetoric thing, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Went to Penn State, fell in love with journalism, was a half-assed student most of the time. Got into the Scholars Program anyway. Had a course with Wilma Ebbett my senior year, and that changed everything.
Really?
And Robert Hesfith as well. But so the three strains of my training: journalism, print journalism, very traditional, conservative, grammatically prescriptive print journalism, which is fine with me. American literature, and then what would become rhetoric, though Wilma didn't use the word.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know about her, but she was.
I don't.
Okay.
I mean, that's a name I recognize, but that's the depth of the recognition.
She, among many other things, taught the likes of Wayne Booth and Philip Roth.
Really?
To teach writing at Chicago in the Hutchins College.
Sure.
And when I was a master's student at Chicago and I was feeling particularly doleful and middle class, I would go look at the plaque of her teaching award, the 1947 Quantrell Award. So she ended up at Penn State after a little time at CU, actually, in 1974, and then I had a class with her in 1983, and it made all the difference because she expected the world from me.
Mm-hmm.
She resembled my mother physically, though she was a very educated woman of the same age. She and my mother passed away the same week, actually. And the rest is history. I went on to a job at the local Night Rider paper in Center County. Always knew I wanted to go to graduate school. I love language. I love the study of English language and literature and the history of English. And I'm sure thanks to Wilma, I got into Chicago.
Yeah.
I was accepted a few other places as well. And then you ask how I got back there. Well, let's go mythopoesis. No.
Yeah. Well, let me ask first about how long did you do the journalism thing?
I was a full-time journalist as an undergrad.
Uh-huh.
So the Daily Collegian, 22,000 circulation.
Yeah.
Daily newspaper.
Sure.
So one of the reasons I was a not very impressive student was because I spent 50 to 60 hours in the newsroom in a lot of different jobs, editing and managing editing, and decided not to run for editor. I went on to direct the board of directors of Collegian Incorporated, which is separate from the university, when I was a grad student, which is where I learned to do a budget. We had a $1.5 million budget, which at the time seemed huge to me.
Yeah.
So I was the only woman on the board and the chairman of the board of directors. Student journalism was really important to me.
Yeah.
But then I worked for 2 years at the second smallest Night Rider, when Night Rider still existed.
Yeah.
This is pre media outlets, both radio and newspapers, maximizing corporate profits and all the as we have had in publishing,
Yeah.
all the conglomeration of media. So it was a great job. I was news editor of the Bulldog edition. Kids, there used to be evening papers. Kids, there used to be print.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the transition in the middle 80s from evening papers to, with the advent of USA Today, I'll keep my fingers down,
Yeah.
really moved things to morning papers.
You know,
I
this
did that for 2 years.
just really digressive, but about
My
the
job.
same time, my first teaching job was at, well, it was in Findlay College in 1980 to 83.
In
It was
Ohio.
in Ohio. It was right after I'd finished my master's. And the second year I was there, the president, I mean, this was such a small place, the president would ask you, would I advise the student publications? And so I spent Tuesday evenings from 7 p.m. till 2 in the
Putting the
morning.
paper
Putting the
bed.
paper, yeah. And but the other thing that's interesting was I remember about, it was the second year I was there, maybe the first year, USA Today came out, and I remember these conversations with the reading specialist at the college, who saw this as a really good tool for teaching reading, in the sense of, well, it's going to be visually appealing and all of this. And then I said, well, yeah, but here might be some other things. So we had these great debates at the time about whether this was a portent for good or evil.
The
and,
award for best in-depth paragraph.
yeah, yeah.
USA Today. You know what happened,
Yeah.
right? Stories went, yeah, sorry.
So when you went to Chicago, did you go there to study literature, rhetoric?
English language and literature.
Yeah.
The R word was in my brain, if not yet my thumos, because when I did my honors thesis on Faulkner, I was a Faulknerian. I ended up a Faulknerian as an undergrad.
Okay.
And so Robert Hudspeth, who's a bibliographer of Margaret Fuller and Thoreau, recommended this Rhetoric of Fiction book to me, and Scholes and Kellogg's The Nature of Narrative, which is another book
Oh,
I
yeah,
very much esteem. So by the luck of the draw, literally, I had a winter quarter course with Wayne, and yet another generous teacher.
Yeah.
I had never been around so many rich people in my life. And I refused to be intimidated. In my first quarter class, they kept mentioning this Derrida guy. So I went to it was a computer, not a card catalog.
Right.
And I found Diderot. And I learned all about Diderot. I didn't have French at the time. So what I loved about, okay, I'm calling you Wayne, but I still am not comfortable with this. What I liked about Mr. Booth is he said, no, the fact that you ask these questions, you're getting an education.
Yeah.
Your colleagues are kind of too stuck up and worried to do that. But I also had never worked less hard in my life than at Chicago.
Really?
And so I think this is the right phrase, noblesse oblige, once you're in, I was not at all impressed with the rigor. I was expecting Wilma's rigor. I was expecting to continue to improve myself. And let's just say the few bad habits I had at the time only were exacerbated by my time in Hyde Park.
Yeah.
I returned then, so I finished my master's and was accepted into the PhD program and did not want to stay.
Right.
And I got the finger from
Yeah.
Mr. Booth, this one.
Oh, yeah.
There, you'll be back. But instead I went home, which was the first of my returns home. Home to State College, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And became a lecturer and started teaching rhetoric. Fell in love.
Yeah.
Nancy Lowe was my first instructor of how to instruct. Jack Sells, Marie Secor. And there was no going back.
Yeah.
So I had the lectureship with the masters,
Sure.
similar to what you had, and boy, it brought, I can go pointy-headed Habermas on this, but it brought together all those various strains of the language arts that I loved. So rhetoric didn't divide creative writing from argumentative writing. It didn't divide speech from writing. It didn't divide the visual. It didn't ignore the ear, which is It's my big gripe with visual rhetoric. Please, our undergraduates can't use their ears anymore. Turn off the video, turn on NPR.
Yeah.
So I fell in love with rhetoric back at Penn State.
Did you find at that time, I'm always interested in how people experienced or didn't divisions within English studies or whatever like big term you want to use.
Within or across?
Well, for example, given the peculiarities of my background, it was always perfectly reasonable that somebody would study literature and creative writing, and so when I would read these accounts of, evil literary studies, or
evil literary studies.
Yeah, or self-absorbed creative writing, or and I'm sure it was coddling composition or what. They weren't in my experience until much later, and then I encountered them, but maybe I was naive. But so what was your sense of?
I want to get Plato out of my head and go back to your question. I blame Plato for this, but not just Plato, and so I'll save that for my talk because it's already in there.
Uh-huh.
Yes, even as an undergraduate, and I will limit myself, attempt to 2 anecdotes here.
Yeah.
Because I did so well at the student paper, they let me into the journalism major sooner than I was supposed to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And a man, God rest his soul, whom I shall refer to only as Professor Hard, because there was a headline in the local paper when the Washington Star closed that said, "Falling star hits Professor Hard." So I didn't even have to make it up. He was definitely Professor Hard. He wrote an ethics journalism textbook called Groping for Ethics in Journalism. Anyway, when I said that I wanted to change my major to English writing, because the journalism major felt redundant at this point. I had learned the trade, I had learned the practice, I had learned the habit, I had learned the epistemology. I didn't need these stupid theory classes. He denied me the right to take a newspaper fund scholarship with the New York Times because apparently you want to write the great American novel. I said, no, I don't want to write the great American novel. I just want to write in a variety of
novels.
There you go. I think he was probably poisoned by Norman Mailer at too early an age or something. I don't know what the problem was. So definitely the distinctions among different kinds of writing, professional writing, creative writing, were there in the curriculum at the time within the College of Liberal Arts. Secondly, and this has as much to do, well, you ask about divisions within first.
Mm-hmm.
As a graduate student, definitely those divisions were still there.
Mm-hmm.
Of my 5 comprehensive exams, 1 was in rhetoric, and it shared both the speech tradition and the composition tradition.
Right.
The other 4 were historical periods of literature.
Right.
For this, I am not ungrateful.
Yeah.
Because I had never read Moby Dick. I had never read Uncle Tom's Cabin. I had never read a lot of what then was newly ethnic literatures coming into the canon. But the fact of the matter is, if we are going to try to get back to that holistic approach to language arts, which is one of the old fuddy-duddy things I call it, we have to do 3 jobs. We have to learn 3 canons. We have to participate in 7 different organizations.
Yeah.
So that split within was there. Certainly was there in my time as a graduate student. Certainly was there in my time in Texas. Hello, John.
How are you?
It seems perennially that we have a dream hope of getting over it. Something that Andrea Lunsford and Kurt Wilson and I just wrote for the Sage Handbook of Rhetoric. We point out these perennial dream fantasies of getting them all back together again. And I think democracy's at stake. I think we have to get them back together.
Well, that's what I was going to maybe ask you to talk about that. I want to come back to the life arc, but it seems to me now that there are at least 2 broad positions. One broad position would be shake the dust of literary studies, English studies writ large off our feet and pursue either composition studies or rhetorical studies or
or literacy.
Or literacy, and anywhere there are a number, and those identifications or desired identifications are interesting too. But you're thinking that, hey, wait a minute, that the counter tradition, which would be maybe a dream of integration, or at least a dream of you know, not having contempt for
Yes.
things. So anyway, and you even invoke democracy. So, so just tell me a little bit about what you think we get from, because I tend actually to be a
Synthesizer.
yeah, that would be my ideal. I fret a little bit about pure composition studies or pure whatever.
I do too, rotten with perfection. Katie said it pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
You can historicize this easily in the German Research University here. Of course, Jim Berlin's work is above and beyond. Sharon Crowley's as well, Susan Miller's as well. But how specialization really affected the different disciplines. There's much less of that on the speech side in terms of historicizing it, though there's some of it.
No, really.
Yeah. But as with the language arts, or I should say, as with the biological sciences, also with the language arts.
Mm-hmm.
Except the hard scientists and the social scientists are figuring out more easily how to collaborate with each other across disciplines than the humanists are.
Yeah.
And this is part of what's so at stake.
Yeah.
Higher education is facing a huge legitimation crisis. And until we can articulate what humanists do, I know this is part of Michael Burbay's work, and I respect him and his work, but if you're going to talk to external constituencies about what we do in terms of language and its connection to democracy, it can't be all about high theory and cultural studies.
Yeah, yeah.
So I will continue to do the work that I want to do with rhetoric and democracy. I don't have high hopes that it will happen at R1 universities anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
And this is poignant for me,
Yeah,
given the land grant tradition.
yeah.
And again, I'll talk in the paper about the fact that Penn State now has the highest tuition of any public university in the country.
Really?
And it was a land grant.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, yeah.
but yes, unless we can explain how hearing, listening, gesture, visuality, writing, expression, expressivism, argument, all of these things are part of the symbol using animal. I don't think we have a whole lot of hope. Certainly not of acquiring funding.
Yeah.
Right. Y'all are in a blessed position right now, and I applaud that. I mean, it's wonderful, the investment that has been made here in general, but also to the humanities and the writing program. It's very unusual right now.
Yeah.
I can think of one hand with Band-Aid of programs that are in that situation right now. So it's another reason it's such a blessing to be here right now. Get reinvigorated.
Yeah.
Cupcakes. What else?
So,
This is antithetical to my nature, by the way. I'm a shy girl. Everybody believes it? It's true.
I had started by asking, just sort of autobiographically, which was not great design, but it turned out to be a productive one. So you did this degree at Penn State. What was your dissertation?
Oh, the DIS?
Yeah.
You said the degree at Penn State. I was
Oh,
thinking,
no.
just let me mention.
No, I fast forwarded you.
No, I don't care. Undergraduate writing option. English writing option, which has since been done away with at Penn State.
Oh, okay.
So what was beautiful about that is it taught me rhetoric before I knew the word.
Mm-hmm.
Because the goal is not to make great writers. The goal is to make people who can write and speak well in a variety of situations.
Sure.
And so I can throw a poem when I need to.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, dissertation. Novel Controversies, it was called.
Mm-hmm.
Dirty and Dangerous Books. It turned into the book Citizen Critics.
All right.
So the idea is not to read. My committee could not understand. So you're not offering interpretations of these novels, Rosa? Actually, I think Joyce's Ulysses, Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer have kind of been done. Who am I? what got me into the project was when Andrea Dworkin's Mercy and Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho came out about the same time. And American Psycho, it was during the first Persian Gulf War.
Yeah.
American Psycho got all this attention because of the serial rape and dismemberment of women and the violence, in addition to the critique of corporate capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Why you need one to do the other.
Yeah.
And Dworkin, who was attempting to intervene with actual sexual violence, her book was ignored because she's a pariah.
Mm.
So I'm not I read The Ouse and I read a bunch of other reception history stuff. But it was really Habermas and this idea of literary public spheres. Where did democracy come from historically?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it came from people sitting around and talking about different kinds of texts. A literary public sphere does not necessarily mean an aesthetic public sphere. It means talking about a text, spoken or written, with some, I don't mean objective, like true, but object status, so that it can be discussed, and then it generates more discourse. So topoi, man.
Uh-huh.
These texts are topoi. James Joyce is just a topos. Ulysses. And I said I was a Wagnerian.
Yeah.
I love difficult, problematic, censored, samizdat, dirty books. But the point is not what are they in themselves, like a well-read but how do they energize other conversations?
Yeah.
So the diss was,
So about
somehow it happened.
About the time you were working on that was when we were on that panel Dark Ages ago, and because you were talking about Habermas and
Yeah.
yeah.
I was telling Eliana, I've been in a room with you with lots of people, but we did a focus group for Alan Bacon once, back when it was called something else.
Yeah.
And it was after I had Lester's course at Penn State. He was visiting one summer.
Okay.
And it was before he started writing textbooks.
Uh-huh.
And so it was all about textbooks evil. And so I came to this Alan and Bacon thing as a final year grad student. Textbooks evil. Oh God, poor dog. So anyway, I blush.
So when you what attracted you to Texas when you went there? Beyond Jack saying this is a no-brainer, and Lester saying this is a no-brainer.
CMU was too close to my mother-in-law.
Okay.
Albuquerque, I didn't like the zoning. Kansas didn't do it for me.
Surprise, surprise.
It was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Now I could go through the rest of the list,
Yeah,
but I took a lot of crap for it from other people because of the whole division. So Alan Kennedy, who was it's really interesting to think that had I gone to Illinois, Chicago, Stanley Fish would have been my dean.
Yeah.
Okay, repress that. I'll also repress the Stanley Fish stories I have. Really, I can edit myself. I can. Okay, good. The question again was, Texas. Yeah. The division. People would say, well, she's not into English.
Yeah.
She wants to work for a division. I still love Lester's explanation of the DRC Festival. It's a mythopoeic one.
Mm-hmm.
He said once, and I'm sure he did not want me to remember this. But in terms of Faulknerian characters, I'm not Miss Rosa, I'm Quentin. Without the suicide at Harvard. Maxine Hairston, Lester Fagley said, laid an egg on the beach and swam away.
Wow.
Isn't that wonderful? So, the most exciting time in my career was building, and a lot of it was set in motion by Knaby, by Linda, by Lester, by John, certainly.
Yeah.
But the public's theory going to composition, which is really what I thought the rest of my career would have been, and I probably should have led it at that.
Yeah.
But Lester and John and Linda and everybody, Peg, John Slayton, really grokked that, really understood the public's connection. And I had the great privilege of becoming director of the Writing Center. And there you don't just theorize it and practice it, you can build it. So that's where I got the reinventing higher education from the ground up line.
Right.
Building publics, not just studying them.
Yeah.
and building them across the university and outside the university. And then the tower course kind of was the accidental, infamous. I moved there in '94, and on August 1st, 1995, KLBJ, I'm a radio head, KLBJ AM was going to develop...
Is that really the name?
Mm-hmm.
KLBJ.
Yeah, that's great.
And it's Lady Bird's money, let's be clear.
Oh, okay.
Let's be very clear. Oh man, the stories, but they will soon be in print. They had allowed an hour for people to call in. It was the 29th anniversary of the tower shootings.
Right.
3 hours later, people were still calling in. Okay, Rhetoric Girl says, these memories seem to have nowhere else to go.
Mm.
What can it be that these people keep calling talk radio? And this is rough. I was funeral director's daughter, should have said that earlier. Interesting that these people have nowhere else to take these memories, and that they're saying things like, why do the media keep doing this? Why do they keep bringing it up? I have to remember my husband, Officer Billy Speed, every year, why do they bring this up? I can't stop talking about it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have anybody else to talk about it if it weren't for this radio show.
Yeah.
So, voila, whatever. Undergraduate rhetoric class, the only place for me to take it.
Yeah.
The best place for me to take it.
Yeah.
And I could Coleridge that one to death. So if you want to know anything else about the tower class, that's great. But that was that, and the people I knew and loved and worked with there were the happy, and Austin, and live music, and yeah, it was a dream come true.
So was it going home again that took you back to Penn State?
Both my folks passed away while I lived in Texas, and so I think part of it was that. Part of it was one center for another center.
Yeah.
But the other center went away mysteriously after the first year back at Penn State. So, it sucked. To use the vernacular of our undergraduates. It really sucked.
Yeah, it didn't rock.
It did not rock. The stasis of evaluation. So there we are.
Yeah. I've blathered with questions, but Richard, you've been auditing.
And taking
Anything
notes.
that came up that... I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine. And I think it's not necessarily a question that follows, but it's a question that I think about, especially, and I know this comes from your... Well, given that, no. How I follow up the U.S. Constitution. And I know you said that you're developed into the citizen rhetoric.
Citizen critics.
Yeah, critics. I was just getting part of that.
No problem.
And you talked much about American Psycho in that. And one of the things, and this was '91, but one of the things in part of my field and studies on video games and looking at that rhetoric of violence in video games that we see sort of erupting in the public sphere, it makes me wonder, looking at American Psycho, if American Psycho were released today, whether it would have the controversy that it did in '91 when placed in contrast to Grand Theft Auto and some of the video games and the public discussion that takes place there.
Particularly after Columbine.
Yeah.
And I say that reverentially.
Mm-hmm.
Where I am. I think Patrick Bateson worked for Bear Stearns. So I don't mind having done a certain injustice to Bret Easton Ellis's book, because to make certain things present, I had to make other things less present, to a point. But there's no doubt that there's a robust critique of corporate capitalism in the book. And I think that's very much tied into corporate capitalism more generally. And certainly gaming. The kind of games like Grand Theft Auto that are meant only to maximize attention rather than to necessarily build linguistic, cognitive, democratic skills are very much at stake through corporate capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
I had the great fortune to spend a lot of time in a computer writing and research lab at Texas. And the lesson there, and there were so many, but primo, we don't just have to study these tools, and we sure as hell don't have to use them. We can build our own. So I actually have undergraduate gamers out of my honors public speaking class who are working on democracy games right now. So the whole gaming thing can be really different. Do I think it would be differently controversial now? I would hope so, not entirely. I would hope that the scenes with staple guns and other things would still cause controversy. You probably know that it was released as a movie.
Yeah.
And what the movie was able to do was to emphasize the satire element.
The absurdity, yeah.
So in the Dirty and Dangerous Books class that I teach, I don't teach American Psycho to the whole class, but I always offer it as a book that there could be group projects on. So I had some great group projects on it in the fall. And there was a great divide, a continental divide, about the question of humor. And the cool, cruel ethos, the kind of thing that you see in Grand Theft Auto, the shooting of prostitutes. Free association, so please follow up, because I just threw a lot of things at you there.
No, I think it's a good point. My wife and I are editing sort of the journal, special issue of this journal, and one of the pieces had talked about, giving up on commercial games and trying to create more student-friendly games. And one of my critiques of that was, as soon as we do that, as soon as we take the real out of the game, or take the critique, whatever that critique, however you read that critique of commercial games out of it, are they games anymore? And what do they say about us as educators? That are we trying to make our students stuff safe for our students, or are we actually trying to prepare them to work in a world that releases American Psycho and releases Grand Theft Auto? And it was a critique we gave to one of our authors, and I don't know what they're going to end up doing with it.
But I'm with you entirely. I'm with you in Rockland. Making the world safe for democracy.
Right.
At the end of a gun.
Yeah.
So I hear you. I think there's a huge middle position between those two. And that would be, just like I'm not anti-capitalist, I think capitalism can work really well at a certain scale when it's about making profits, not maximizing profits. And so the ethical critique of commercial gaming, I think, is really important. An additional analogy I would make is open source democracy, which I'm like, tickled about for the last 3 or 4 years. So rather than having proprietary ways of thinking about games, and this goes back to Faulkner and openness and closure and early hypertext novels and crap like that, there has to be a better way than proprietary, profit maximizing games. What that way is, I am in no position to say. So, can I ask, may I ask you a question?
Yes.
When you said taking the critique out of the games, I don't quite understand. I certainly understand the concern with making games safe for our children, which I don't buy either. But
I meant, I guess what I meant from that is, if we as teachers make sort of games that have a specific pedagogical value, students might consume them differently than if we think of teaching them how to use commercial games or critique commercial games.
cool.
You see what
And
I'm
I would say again that that's a false dichotomy, and there's some space. One of the critiques I have of service learning is similar to this, and we were talking about this last night, not in regard to John's work, but in regard to other service learning programs. If teacher figures it all out before the class, what the hell? Where are the transferable skills? Where's the sustainability? So I make my colleagues very nervous, and I've just learned to live with that. I'll probably leave it at that for now, but making old Maine nervous is it doesn't come to me naturally, and I don't find it fun. But I really see no other way.
Okay, so you've got this background, these roots in journalism and Faulkner and all of these things. Every I was gonna say every week, but it's probably like 3 times a day. We'll read things about the death of newspapers, and the broader issue to me there is, okay, the nature of the public sphere, the nature of who's making what kinds of knowledge for circulation, and just to put my own position on this, I'm thinking an awful lot of the bloggers that I know are not out interviewing DOD officials.
They're ejaculating their logos.
Yeah. I might not put it that way, but so I don't know what's your take? I mean, this is a preposterous question on the nature of the public sphere and what are the organs or channels that make sense.
Citizen critics. That's the best. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not proprietary to my book at all. It's
Right.
out of NYT versus Sullivan around a case involving MLK and Bull Connor.
Uh-huh.
Citizen critic. Happily, I found that it had come from somewhere after I wanted to use it. We need to train our students to be citizen critics.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about difficult things. We have to. It's the only hope we have.
Yeah.
And so enabling students to ask questions, sometimes they get arrested. This happened last week on our campus, and I'll be talking about that a little bit. And it's a damn shame when a university, because students are asking questions, feels they have to arrest those students.
Mm-hmm.
But it happens sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So, frankly, I think combination of education and equipping students to be citizen critics without those who want to.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them don't want to. Bah, that's fine. One of my critiques of communication studies is that it generates, and this is like Sharon Crowley's critique of Fordism and composition.
Right.
It creates smiling, interchangeable parts for business and industry.
Yeah.
Women are supposed to look a certain way in communication studies, and it's much more corporate and much more polished. And I love my English origins and my foremothers in English for making me not have to be that way. But the other thing is definitely corporate media.
Mm-hmm.
So blogging has certain things going for it. We need important studies. A couple of my grad students are working on studies of expressivism and argumentation in blogs.
Mm-hmm.
I blog a lot. I'm kind of a free association blogger.
Mm-hmm.
But at least we have a collaborative blog for rhetoric, so
Sure.
it's not just... but the corporate media is the problem. And here I follow Robert McChesney until we reclaim our media.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try not to sing the Steve Earle song that has the dirty words in it. Telecommunications Act of 1996
Yeah.
allowed ownership of 3 television stations and 6 or 7 radio stations in any major market. Before that, you needed to and now newspapers were on board as well.
Right.
So you have huge slashing of journalists. There are very few journalists left anymore. There are very few reporters anymore.
Mhm.
Mainly their talent.
Mm-hmm.
And what caused that? Shareholders who demanded maximizing profits rather than just making profits. So one of the reasons I am most concerned about our democracy, in addition to certain political economy issues in higher education, is because we really don't have a public media anymore.
Mhm.
The airways used to be the people's airways.
Mm-hmm.
Takes us back to the 20s and 30s.
Mm-hmm.
But there are ways to reclaim that, like low power FM, but they tend to be relatively small in scale. One other short paragraph in answer to that, because I'm passionate about it. The last class that I taught at Texas was called Radio Rhetorics. And we didn't just study and listen to, but a friend of mine who worked at Clear Channel at the time, he was a little pissed at the bosses, had a soundboard that nobody was using and some other equipment. So one of the groups of students did, microbreweries, micro broadcasting
Right.
from a van driving around Austin. Again, micro, small scale.
Yeah.
But boy, and I'll mention this in the talk probably, if instead of instrumental public opinion polling, we had student papers and student speeches telling us what our undergraduates think about our polity,
Yeah.
what an interesting world it would be.
Yeah.
So radio is a cool way, whether it's streaming or podcasting or good old broadcasting when the airways were the people's airways, of getting student discourses out there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to summarize, higher education, we need to train our students to be citizen critics, and corporate media. I think the public media is gone.
Yeah, I was just reading, I think it was maybe a column in the New Yorker last night, but it was talking about, it was letters to the editor about their last week's demise of newspapers,
I've had to give up the New York.
Yeah.
Right now I'm really regretting it.
Well, anyway, it was a pretty interesting article. One of the people pointed out that they were citing a profit margin for newspapers that seemed preposterous to me. It was like 30 to 35%, and they said now it's down to like 17%, which and they've done that, of course, by lopping off all sorts of people and so on, and they're thinking, legitimately 17% is like huge.
No kidding.
And-
Certainly enough to sustain itself.
Yeah, and so it just became fascinating, and your phrase, having versus maximizing,
Yeah.
making it,
You went to Iowa, you know the Amana colonies.
Oh yeah, sure.
I can dig that kind of capitalism.
Oh yeah.
An example of something I found in the newspaper this week, which shows you the kind of grand theft auto that's going on in our media these days. And I take this a little personally for a number of reasons, but okay. Health shorts
Oh yeah.
from our wire services. What exactly is homeopathic is the headline. Ever wonder what it means when an over-the-counter drug says it's homeopathic? It means that the product has not been approved by the FDA. That's absolute horseshit. Not only does it, well, anyway, just an example.
Wow. What is the color red? It means it's not the color yellow.
And the government says it's yellow today. Oh, it's orange today. It's always orange.
Oh, that's just so.
Oh, okay.
Well, picking up on that theme a little bit, I was just wondering, we were talking earlier about there being a legitimation crisis, especially for the humanities and universities, and the idea of building publics. So if the humanities needs to make a case for itself in order to sort of be able to survive, it's going to need to make a case for different audiences, certainly. And the case that you might make to the sort of mind that puts out what you just read now to kind of that sort of USA Today corporate audience would be very different than if you were trying to justify, for example, writing studies to like unions.
Sure.
So I'm wondering so one way around that problem is just to sort of advertise what you're doing as generic critical thinking, right? Which nobody, if you define it sort of abstractly enough, nobody can actually object to. The other way to think about it would be, and it seems to be the way in which the direction in which you were going is, if you're
No problem.
building publics, that seems to me to involve having to take sides. That you can't be justifying yourself equally to sort of all people, and that you're affiliating yourself with some publics and not necessarily with others. So I'm wondering if that's the conclusion I reached, trying to put together various things that you've said. Does that seem like a direction that you would agree with, or?
Yeah. I might tweak the language a little bit, and notice that while we're going to agree, we're in the same ding.
Mm-hmm.
And since you read the Latour, I know you're going to. Because one of the reasons I left newspapers is because I was there when they busted the union.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that those two things would come together in your question. Anyway, does it involve taking sides? Does building publics involve taking sides? I want to be with Pete Seeger on this one, but I don't know if I quite can. And I want to do something sweet and tropological with the sides thing, but all argument begins in agreement, and that's going to seem facile. What I might return to is, and the Constitution's part of this, I have had to waive it, particularly when I lived in Texas, but also on Penn State's campus. For instance, to get onto the Capitol grounds when President Bush the first was speaking in the Capitol. And they didn't want to let us on the grounds. We didn't have a permit. We weren't an organized group. We wanted to be on the public space. So that's, in a way, a literal taking of sides, but it's also public common. It's the common space. So maybe part of what I hear in your question, and you may very well not mean this, is the binary that I think rhetoric can get us beyond, which is are you for it or against it? Is it good or bad? Does it suck or does it rock? And one of the reasons I'm so passionate about the Stacys is, particularly those top three, if we can say, here we are together, yeah, we disagree about some things, and it's not common ground and it's not consensus. That's the one thing I really love about Latour's Bing politic. But it's topoi, it's topos. We had it before, it's the koine topoi. He's just putting it into hipper philosophical language. So the one thing I heard was taking sides. And yes, certain times at the stasis of procedure, you have to say, I think we should walk this way rather than that way. Or when in the death penalty moratorium movement, the first time I saw face recognition software is when we were circling the governor's mansion. And I'm like, why are they taking our pictures? Oh, they're going to upload those. Let's go this way.
Right.
Taking sides, fair enough. But when it comes to, then you ask about affiliation. I don't want to give away one of the lines of my talk, but I also really don't care. Periodic chart chemistry, inert gases, free radicals. I'm a free radical. I'll affiliate ephemerally with almost anything. I have molecules missing from my outer shell. So, and then there's the Hitler problem in rhetoric, right? There's some things you can't really affiliate with. But I don't know that building publics involves discriminations of affiliation. Cool, I never said that out loud before. Thank you for the question. Yeah, that's really cool. But are you satisfied with the taking sides part, though? I don't know.
I'm satisfied with the answer in theory. I guess I'm trying to, I hadn't thought about it in quite these terms until you were talking, so I don't know where I stand on it exactly, but it seems like, so for example, the students who were arrested, right, that the one is on the side of the students, I think. That in that case, your responsibility as a person who construes rhetoric to be not just a mode of analysis, but a mode of action, puts you on the side of those students, and wherever that may lead. And that, if that's the case, like if you can come up with examples like that, where you say, no, there's really no way around that, then it seems to me that has ramifications for how you imagine who you want to legitimate yourself towards, to whom you want to, what kinds of arguments you want to make it to whom. It's not just a process of defending yourself or promoting yourself, but it's that there is a process of affiliation, and you're deciding with whom are we going to make common cause.
Beautiful. I'm reminded of Latour's two things, process being one and objects being the other. And it really seems like we do need both. The taking sides thing, man, Anne gets a footnote from last night saying rhetoric is the being in the moment. You get a footnote for the sides thing. You and Pete Seeger. Penn State for 25 years had a basketball coach who tell me when I need to shut up, who very clearly discriminated against women that she perceived as lesbian and African American women. White women can have braids, they're called French braids or something. Black women can't have cornrows, kind of thing. More insidious than that, actually. So the students were protesting that one night at the Penn State Conference Center, and the Dean of Student Services was there. I was observing. The dean says, Dr. Tripani, who is now gone, I think she was sacrificed at the altar of Paterno, but that's another matter, says, this part of the Penn State Hotel and Conference Center is public. You students dressed in black with the duct tape over your mouths, you can stand there. Where the rich people are, where Coach Portland is getting the Renaissance Woman of the Year award, that's private. Okay, you said rightly, being interested in the arrest of the students put you on the side of the students. I used to have just this journalism part, which would watch and ask and record and observe. When Jesse Jackson came to UT Austin around the Hopwood affirmative action decision, there were 10,000 of us on the mall. He led us in prayer. He asked us to hold hands. And I'm like, okay, journalist?
Yeah.
What are you going to do? So I would say it's less of choosing sides between the administration and the students and more that hand thing, which is, it's not quite the same thing as giving a speech. Maybe. I'm going to get lost in that one for a while. But sometimes it's this.
Yeah.
And as professors, maybe the best thing we can do is this. And generally, if that's the administration, my hunch is they're in a power position. It's like with the proposal arguments. Do you write to the few who have the institutional power, or the many who have the potential power, the dunamis that you want to energize? I'd rather hold hands with the many. Except in Denver right now, where I will get a stomach virus.
Right.
Just kidding.